Okay, everyone, let's begin. Um, okay. Um, Today's title is What Would Eternity Live For? And it's an important question because there are many people on this planet currently who their beliefs on what the world is divided into pretty much two categories, the eternal and the temporal. We look at ourselves, and if we associate with matter, we're temporary. If we associate with language and subjectivity, we are promised a sort of eternity. And so for me, I was wondering, let's assume that right now, I mean, not assume, but right now, we see the mainstream in 2019 sees people as temporary creatures. I mean, just physically, we are. We're here for max 100 years, and then we become a memory, and then even are left in, for example, books maybe. But the thing is that if we can imagine a civilization that is temporary, I wanted to imagine a civilization that is eternal. And I wondered, if I never died, if I could never die, what would be the purpose of this site? And I realized either way, there is one common theme between the temporary and the eternal. That means it doesn't matter if you continue for a little while or if you continue for eons. It doesn't matter how awake you are in this reality or how asleep. But the thing is that whatever you are, whether it's a reality or a dream, there is an exploration. There is something there that can be engaged with. And that's the unique thing about life. It's an evolutionary opportunity to engage reality like none before you. So, why am I bringing up this notion of the purpose of the eternal? The reason is because temporary purpose is very easy to contemplate. You know, the guy's like, "What's your purpose?" He's like, "While I'm alive, to have fun and be happy." You'll be like, "Okay." You know? But the question comes down to, if the temporary purpose of life is based on survival and trying, like evolution is this sort of, can be playfully said to be this sort of eternal urge for continuing in manifestation as a manifest being. So it's this eternal urge towards continuation of a sort of system of intelligence or a sort of formation or a sort of value. As if your eyes are aware of something and they want to not only keep that thing here, but they want to keep themselves here to see it. So, in some sense, what that means is there is survival, you know? So, we cannot ignore Darwinian evolution in this, you know? Darwin was, he may have spoken through a specific context, but he was no fool. And so, the question comes, why does an eternal phenomena or an eternal being need to continue? Sorry, why does an eternal being need to survive? That's the exact thing I'm trying to say. And so this survival is very interesting because if you are eternal, you have nothing to lose. If you are temporary, if you're a temporary being, you in some sense have everything to lose because things will pass. And so we open our eyes in a universal sector where change does not avoid us. Change finds every being and in some sense sings their own song, sings a song in their ear. So here's the thing. We tend to live for what is outside of ourselves, you know. I see people living for their physical body, their guy, the person's checking himself out in the mirror. You know, then there is the sort of mentality where the person begins living for others as if other people. And to be honest, love is always has a selfish origin because you don't know the other person. You first know yourself, you don't know the other, and so you have fallen in love with the impression of the moment. And as you pursue the impression of the moment, the more the character of that relationship kind of displays itself. For me, this is the fascinating thing. If we conclude we're temporary objective phenomena, then we have to conclude as temporary as our biological existence is the credibility and the value of our language. But we have seen that the production of the temporary has outlasted the temporary person. Socrates wrote ideas that we speak about still today. You know, the fact that Socrates' words have kind of been passed down to 2019, where I still know, have some inkling of what that man's mind kind of acknowledged. There's a sort of fascinating thing that in language is a sort of continuation, is a sort of attempt to is an attempt at immortality through language. Strangely, not immortality, of course, because whatever influence, like right now, whatever influence the person has, the human being has, your influence is here for a certain time, then it leaves. This is the unique thing. This is why when I looked at this world, a lot of fear, when I really looked at this world, a lot of fear just vanished. The reason is because it seems to be like this space that beings are coming to use, you know? It's kind of like a house that is being sold constantly to a different, person. And so for me, the world is being animated in the eyes of every individual based on how their individuality has come into position. And it's a transference between a collective intelligence and individual intelligence. We're oscillating between these. You see, if you go read every origin story, it's like it was like universal forces that kind of sculpted themselves to the elegance of the human being's questions. So when a person wonders about the purpose of the temporal, they find the creative vision. That is literally the staircase to paradise. It is not paradise, it is the staircase to paradise. That the being that it took like 4 billion years for it to evolve and retain such a consciousness snaps out of the ways it has accepted the world through certain fixed language. You know, your intelligence, Mr. Within finds, has to do more with your awareness rather than with the content of your awareness, because what you are aware of changes. You know, imagine your mind to be a room, and in this room there are certain fixed beliefs, certain furniture in this room. Now imagine you wake up the next morning and you see suddenly the chair is missing. You suddenly see like the table is missing. You suddenly see as time goes on the beliefs are changing. And when beliefs change, the world is permitted and authorized to move in a different way. You know, sometimes people want things so badly that they realize they don't want the actual thing, they want their idea on the thing. And the idea on the thing doesn't exist, right? It's as if this is why Salvador Dali, this surreal painter, he says, do not fear perfection, you will never reach it. What he means is that you can sit down and try to only from your perspective crystallize a sort of explanation on the world. But you will eventually see it's a dynamic phenomenon. So it's as if the world is not asking you to, in some sense, see it. It's more like to work with it. It's as if when you go see your boss, you're not there to just see your boss. You're there for something to happen, a certain communication exchange, a certain plan to go for. You know, I've noticed something very unique. I've noticed something very unique, and it is how in mystical and even religious and certain like practices of the mind, you can say, where something strange happens. The person surrenders their ego to a force beyond them, and in doing so becomes kind of like, how can I tell you, it's as if when you have an ego you're just an expression of this world. When you have no ego, your ego is the reception from the world, right? So I noticed something, that all these people who in some sense are trying to transcend the individual identity end up as a collective pool of energy. Do you see what I mean? They end up in a non-conceptual collective dynamic. And what that means is the only way we can transcend our egos by seeing our ego is not our ego. It is like phenomenal part of a bigger landscape. That is how multidimensionality works. Any dimension you see in yourself, there's more. Right now, as I'm giving this talk, I'm hearing the Attack on Titan soundtrack, season 3, and this show is a remarkable show in regards to writing, but any moment where humanity revalues itself in regards to the care for future generations, the civilization wins. There have been some people who say that this whole karmic cycle, as if the Buddhists acknowledge a sort of incarnation cycle, as if the soul is not freed, it's attached to a personality and trying to be a person. So because there's this kind of urge from the deeper self of your being to constantly be a person, you animate into a person. You know, to be honest, deep, Buddhist thought is very similar to how animators think. You see, it's as if you create a character and you animate it, but the Buddhist thinks that they are a character they have created, which has been animated by some um, higher hand, you know? This higher hand, of course, is non-conceptual. I find what Buddhists are finding God through emptiness, and religious people are finding emptiness through God. For example, Abrahamic religions, if you take into consideration. So this notion that if you were an eternal being, literally a moment that could not perish, what would be the need for, in some sense, life? Now, this is a deep question. This is a deep question, and I'm asking you to acknowledge these from the scholars and philosophers' table. These Mr.Within talks, um, Aristotle has this saying. He says it's the sign of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. So I'm not sharing these ideas for people to accept. I'm just, in some sense, drawing a landscape that I see through words and wondering what else is there. You see? And the first thing is creative vision. And creative vision at its core has to do with the energy of the being. And the energy in its most ultimate witnessing is an instantaneous moment of being. So what I'm trying to say is that reality first exists, then there is something to experience. You see, so there is an existential level underneath all our philosophies on action and activity, that this underlying existential level has no meaning aside from just being here to be something. So at some point, the attention of the being has to not just step out of objective phenomena, but it has to step out of subjective phenomena. And a person will ask, if I'm not in my body and I'm not in my mind, where am I? If I'm not in my thoughts and I'm not in my body, it's like, if I'm none of these, what am I? And that's the unique thing. I think that the person cannot just be their body, because their body is being governed by a sort of animative force, call it soul or what you will, but like this animative force, this animative experiential force in existence that we find ourselves to be. It can walk with definitions or it can walk without them. Before you learn language as a child, you are experiencing life pre-definition. You see, it's as if somebody could go speak to the child. Like if somebody comes here and you don't know Japanese, and somebody comes in Japanese and says something to you, you wouldn't be, and some says something really important to you, and you would see you would not understand the language. You may see the person, the body language of the person, how nervous the person is, how nervous the person isn't. You see, human life, its purposes come into a sort of solidification, come into view, in some sense when there is something to live for. And when there's something to live for, that means the conscious free will can successfully achieve an inner reality externally before external reality takes it away from its inner structure. You see, on some level, some people think when I die, it's all the projection of the brain, what's going to happen, and you're going to come into some wave pool of energy or whatever, you know, a wave pool of nature's movement after the decomposition of the material body. But whatever, like whatever people see, whatever opinions choose to walk in the minds of man, I find the purpose of individual existence is to explore collective ways. The unique thing is that we are not alone in the world. And to not be alone means there are truths beyond our eyes that are breathing. I feel once the individual identities of the citizens of this planet, the members of humanity, once they're, once you have lived enough for yourself, you're going to live for your future self. And your future self will have to do with the decisions you make now. You know? The child which is desire bound is still, their attention of the child is on the information of the past. Something unique that I find kind of freed me from a lot of, it's kind of like that director, I forget the guy's name, but this famous director said something very fascinating about directing. He said he kind of, I don't remember the exact sentence, but he said something like he gets rid of the rigors of kind of directing by making sure he casts the right actors. So what that kind of means is that if you have the right ideology, a lot of the extra work goes away. So this is something I noticed, that my ancestors, they were just working hard. They were not working smart. And to work smart means that your intelligence is based on the data. So if you see more data in your environment than others do, automatically you're acknowledging things that others aren't. It doesn't make you, in comparison to them, better or greater, but it just means the person has more attention to the dynamics of how free will moves throughout the day. The world is being too solidified, and let me tell you what's going to happen. It happens like every couple thousand years for civilizations, you know. What I mean by that is, like, some civilizations, they become too subjective inspired. What that means is they are trying to make their beliefs real. So what that what that means is, like, for example, the ancient Greeks walked on streets where once they looked at the clouds on a sunny day, they noticed there were gods standing there. They conceived that in the back of their mind, in the context of their living, that there were forces beyond them. Now, what happens is we see a movement. We see a movement from the power of truth being on objectivity first, idol worship, then on subjectivity, ideal worship. You know, like, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but a lot of mythology of many cultures, it arises from poets. Did you know that? The purpose of the poet is to sing a new song for the world to hear. And those songs, for some poets, the ancient seers of thought, in some sense, I consider them, we see our mythology. Believe it or not, this is the beauty of the world we're living in 2019. This is the cool thing about it, that thoughts have as much solidity as matter. You see, it's as if a person appreciates laws. Do you know how long it took for us bewildered beasts on the surface of this planet to evolve to a civility where we could acknowledge law? And the issue is, people should not break laws, but the laws need to get adjusted to the consciousness of the community. That's the issue with politics too, that the political system is always behind. That means no political system can acknowledge the individual, because the political system is based on, the political system evolves slower, the consciousness of the political system evolves slower than the consciousness of what it's governing. And I find that the world is going to become a mixed up place. We're going to eventually see that the walls between nations existed only in our minds. And that's the significance. A new era of humanity will be ushered in. It will be ushered in because we have reached the dead end of knowledge. I say this is something very, I say it very playfully, but I'm kind of shouting it in the streets. um, that the educational system will have to confront an apocalypse. The human being will realize the limits of its conceptual reach. And when your mind can't reach it, what that means is, I consider language a technology. Guys, I'm telling you, it took me, I think, like 20 years to truly comprehend, to truly wake up how language was steering my life into motion. And then there came a day where I am like, the waves of this world never stop coming. And so it's as if, like, the child first is born in this world, then the data, like, think of it this way. Think of it as if, since your childhood, every day where your eyes have opened, waves of, let's say these kind of like, you can't see the waves, but let's just, waves of data have been hitting you. Waves of information. These waves of information, I'll give you an example. For example, me, I was born in Iran, right? So aside from the ideology of my parents, it was also the ideology of the environment, which was even influencing the ideology of my parents. You see, a country is a very important thing to be maintained, and the ways that a country thrives is in its acknowledgement of the value it has. Do you know there are so many nations right now that they have no way of acknowledging or somehow bringing the great talent of their country into motion? The reason is because they are thinking about power and not creative vision. Creative vision is a collective effort. That means the civilization is, because it's still being run by personalities, those personalities cannot see beyond themselves. That's the issue with power. When you give someone too much power, you have, in some sense, kind of, that person may think, yay, I'm lucky, I have power. But that person actually has been chained, has been enslaved to a conditional victory. And this is why some wise men, they understand the amount of time they give their failures is the amount of time they give their victory. That means there is no victory that is a finale. It's as if you, even though you have won the battle, there is no implication you have won the war, you know? And this war is our species' war with the unknown. There are unknown forces here. The efforts of science, religion, every ideology has in some sense existed out of a human being's wonder for how the world moved in front of their eyes and even behind their eyes. These Mr. Within talks are mainly focused about the movements behind the eyes of the person, because I realized, like, why else would all this happen? Why else would there be this kind of global network of the internet? And why else would there be a lot of people around? You see, it's as if the inner realities have to, in some sense, integrate. And once they integrate, the greatest ideas from people's inner worlds begins to, in some sense, step out. Right now, we're living for people. There will come a time where we will, as a species, acknowledge language properly and use it as a technology to establish an experiential efficiency. For me, it's as if, like, imagine you right now, whoever you're listening, imagine you were given the ultimate powerful position of whatever you said, whatever you dictated, imagine became the civilization. Imagine you were some sort of remote control for how the civilization would move. How would you move it? And that's the question. That we have thought that it has to be based on only what we know, and we have to make a decision, because why else would the free will be here? However, with every decision comes a sacrifice of a world. And that's what people don't realize. Every moment of your life, you have been giving up things and taking up things. And these things are not just things, they're ideology as well. As a character in this show, Attack on Titan, by the name of Mikasa, says, this world is cruel, but it is also very beautiful. And so when we, in the face of the worst conditions of humanity, can see the existence of some beauty, that is the hope in the back of the mind of the individual that shouts at them. You see, imagine externally, physically you can be limited. You can be limited in extreme situations. I've read it in history, stories about many people in history who the person chose the path of grace, and then the world became ungraceful, as if the person chose to, in some sense, be like Christ and then got crucified. And so I wondered why. I wondered why, and I realized it has to do with the effort of the right ideology at the right time, but there are many moments where what may seem to be the wrong ideology at the time will eventually be seen as the right ideology. So what I'm starting to realize is that human beings, we on some level cannot live in the same world. Did you know that? Because everybody's comfort with the administration of how the world should be administered is different. Do you see? For God's sakes, we are creatures which still care about how we externally look. Do you think our educational systems have truly explored the inner realities? Why did Carl Jung say? Why did Carl Jung say, you know, Until the unconscious is made conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate. So there has to be an effort for no longer external exploration and advancement, but inner exploration and advancement. And the next levels of the evolution of humanity's inner realities has to do with an integrative collective efficiency, where no longer the imagination of one person has found a lightsaber tool. Reality has a unique thing to acknowledge, like something unique you should acknowledge. The reason I am personally inspired, it's as if you see, some people say they are creative, some people say they are not creative. I don't believe in language that way. I believe that you either open your eyes in this world and you see something that you feel inspired to move towards, or you see nothing. And if you see nothing, you will most likely conclude your activities to your inner realms. There's a concept which I will most likely give a talk about, but it's called roars of the inner child. And what that means is it is your memories memories maximum rebellion against non-existence. And it happens, believe it or not, every day. Every time you wake up, as if the eyes have been granted and you the free will is ready for the next round. But when you sleep, it's as if you retire the day. You know, people think you retire after you're age 65 or something. I'll tell you this, no, no, no. There are some moments you just have to let go, and there's some moments you have to pick up. And but I wondered, like, okay, how can people really align to this awareness? And I realized their lives have to become full of meaning internally. You know what that means? That means the moment mankind saw emptiness, it laughed, and then it cried, and then it laughed. And the cosmos was like, mankind, you just saw the inevitable emptiness. Why are you laughing? Why are you not just crying? And mankind would say, I saw emptiness, and I saw the hopeless and the meaningless, and tears in some sense poured. But once the person sees the simplicity in the acknowledgement of condition, there is a freedom. You see, for me, it's about how to handle 8 billion and growing experiencers of the world to a certain time. That is the question. And anybody who's in power right now, I don't know like how much my words will echo in the ears of people, but the world is not serious with itself. It is hiding and cowering away in illusion. Our systems and institutions are taking too long to update. And so we are lost in a world that is, it's as if the years of the species are being wasted due to the inefficiency of the collective vision. For how long? Do you know there is an incredible beings are entering the system and leaving the system all the time. And for those people who it is their last moment on this earth and they're looking at this world, they will wonder about their time. They will wonder about what is left behind for the future. You see, we had to create the future. The species had to, in some sense, reproduce, regenerate. And so the species fixed that. It completed its task of is physically continuing itself. But now there needs to be the continuity of certain awareness to certain viewpoints. And I consider this, I say these are the pillars of civilization that every human being, whether good or evil, I don't care, you must protect these values. Because once these pillars, these certain values of the civilization, these pillars of our civilization break, then human character will be forgotten or lost in a simulation. And that's tragic. That's the biggest tragedy, when you were in heaven but you saw hell. A notion I firmly believe in, I've spoken about it in this talk, is that you cannot really find paradise. You cannot find anything in the state of a journeyer or in any state where you're expecting something to happen in the future. You will never get anything. Let me tell you why. The reason is because the authorization is not there. Many things that happen to the person and don't happen to the person is because their subconscious mind has authorized the reaction to the activity, to what is active in the moment. And how you realize your subconscious mind, or in some sense the deeper forces that are influencing you, is by, in some sense, being still. This may sound strange to some people, but this is the secret of just meditative practice in general. It's just this law you gotta follow. What is this law? Whenever you're still and silent, you will watch the world move more. Whenever I go in states of stillness and silence, if you've paid attention, I breathe before these talks. Is because when with every breath I am in some sense renouncing the external intention. And when I renounce external intentions, suddenly something unique happens. My heart beats for my mind, not just for my body. And then thoughts flow everywhere. Language is a tool. What do we do with this tool? I've been playing with this tool every day. And all I see that it can help is to inspire action by attempting to be a mirror. Once you understand the self-reflective nature of your intelligence, something unique happens. You no longer judge the world and your karma eradicates. You accept nature. And then comes honor. You see, people who cannot accept themselves, they can never be honorable. They will live in society, excuse my language, as scum. As people of evil nature. It's as if nowadays I look at people in society, I am telling you, they just want to stage and they don't care how vicious they are or not. It's as if you're not just evolved based on your external position. It has to do with your inner position as well. And your inner position is not an idea or a thought, it is an awareness of the moment. Believe it or not, it is so simple that any person who asks what enlightenment is has not understood what the point of it is. Because the point of it is to see how the light in your eyes is being the moment's intelligence. how there is something here and you're here too. You know, life gains a new value. You begin to live for a self that is not just based on your beliefs. When a person is, their life is based on their beliefs, their imagination becomes dormant. So what does that mean? This is something crazy, guys. I think most people don't acknowledge. Religious people have restrictions on what they can imagine. Because if they imagine beyond a certain ideological position, the previous ideological positions will become transparent. So they will feel they have betrayed the world they thought they belong in. I find that everybody has to be like a Shaolin martial art master in regards to ideology and language throughout the day. You see, it's as if, of course, you bring a Shaolin monk who's just been practicing martial arts in the forest, and you bring like some person who's been like a salesman or like that Wall Street or like that business CEO guy in business negotiations all day, and you put them both there, and you wanted to analyze their skill level. You would see internally, externally, the Shaolin monk, of course, is next level in skill. But internally, in regards to the sophistication of the awareness and the use of language, that businessman every day where he's been working with like multi-billion-dollar businesses and shit, you know, stuff like that. You know, it's one of those things where you will first see your body dance in this world, but then you will see your mind dance. And when your mind dances, the more beliefs you have, the smaller your stage. Because a belief doesn't do much. A belief is like a clothing you wear to show off. It's like bling. People are like, I believe this and this and this, and this is the only thing I believe. I'm like, nice, man. You put some jewelry around your neck. Good job. But how much is your authentic attention throughout the day going to the nature of your world? How much do you see what is here, or are you only seeing what you want to be here? Because that is how the personalities of people are in society. Don't think when I'm speaking in 2019, this world of ours is evolved. Let me tell you why it's not evolved. Because we can see better ways it can exist. So it is not evolved. Mr. Within finds that I've noticed something about myself when I give these talks, that after I give a certain, when I reach the future of the civilization, any talk I give, I reach the future of the civilization, the vision translates into a personal response. So what that means is you will find yourself in a moment in this world where you will be purely unknown. It is called pure isolation. This isolation is not an isolation where you have to go in a cave and sit like a freak, you know. It doesn't matter where you sit. This whole world is like a cave. We are all in the emptiness of the cave of the cosmos. The planet is in the middle of nowhere. We are creatures on a rock, and we have invented our language. And so we are now getting restricted by our language. And so there is a war against language. We are at war with language. People don't realize it. It's called, I call it very poetically in some other talks, I call it the language wars. What that means is ideology is fighting for people's attention. Ideas want to fill up the attention of the person. Because the person who believes they're a thought can be trapped into believing they're any thought. And that was the issue with magic. It was the naivety of the person who got deceived. You believe something without knowing it. And then the world suddenly had only become your imagination. A moment will come where the inner child of every human being will roar against the existential inevitability of our mortality. Once you see you're mortal, you don't need any more motivational videos. You realize you're alive once. Every day happens once. What is the greatest vision of your command that commands you? I firmly believe that the inner realities exist for the free will. That's their point. The only reason you have memory and imagination is because they are paint to draw upon in the moment. Marcus Aurelius, this emperor, he has this quote. He says, "The soul is dyed with the colors of its thoughts." That means, like a transparent orb, wherever your attention, wherever this orb moves, whatever surface it moves on, it takes the color of. You are being defined by your environment. When your mind moves from a conditional state to an unconditional state, then the environment doesn't influence you. You reach a sort of point where you are, in some sense, regaining your honor with the spirit of evolution, with the winds of evolution. You see, there are moments where the winds of evolution will find people. And this is the situation. This is the situation. I got to share this Shakespeare quote before it's going to put it more into context. Shakespeare has this quote where he says, "Some people are born great. Some people achieve greatness. Some people have greatness thrust upon them." And what that means is it all has to do with the importance and the urgency to respond to the living world. And so Mr. Within is saying every human being, greatness is now being thrust upon you. It is being thrown at you. You have no choice. You cannot ignore the advancement of your civilization. The efforts of too many of our ancestors has brought us here. It's as if, are we so easily forgetting all the human beings who lived for something on this planet? So for me, what would eternity live for? It kind of seems the visions of all our ancestors' temporary lives is the eternity of this moment. And again, like I'm listening to the Attack on Titan soundtrack, and there's an incredible scene in this show, in this Japanese show. I think I'm gonna start saying the Japanese name, Shingeki no Kyojin. This show has this one episode where it's like this last kind of human extinction scenario where the last armies of humanity are, and this general, this commander named Erwin is like, who's running this army, they are in a situation where they are trapped by these giants. And so all the soldiers are new recruits, they're not even skilled, and so they're all kind of paralyzed by this inevitable fear that they will all get crushed by these rocks that are being thrown by these giant kind of creatures at them, right? So the situation is, Erwin is like this tactical genius in the whole show, and he's the commander of like this kind of humanity's forces. And so he devises this plan where he needs to use the whole army as bait, and even himself. And he realizes these soldiers will just stand here and die unless they listen to his leadership. So the scene I want to tell you and talk to you about, which has to do with this, so remember the title of the talk as I'm saying this. Erwin goes to the soldiers and says, "Soldiers!" And all the soldiers are fear in this kind of like like chaotic euphoria of about to die kind of thing, but it's savage. And so Commander Irvin just goes there and very intensely he says, "Soldiers, get into position, this is your last operation." And all the scared soldiers come up there, and one of the soldiers who's shaking and just shocked looks at Commander Irvin, and Commander Irvin explains. He says, "We all will attack and charge and fight." It's as if they're having these rocks thrown at them, but Commander Irvin's like, "All of you get on your horses. We're going to rage. We're going to fight." You know. And so the soldier who's paralyzed by fear, one of the soldiers is like, "Commander Irvin, are you saying, or will all of us be riding on our horses towards our death?" And Commander Irvin just says, "Soga, yes." He says he's so intently, as if he has no doubt in his mind of anything. He says, "Yes," you know. And then the soldier suddenly says, "And you're saying it's better that if we're gonna die anyways, we fight instead of just standing here and dying?" And then Commander Irving sees the existential situation his soldiers are in. This is really the true elements of his character that shine in the show. He comes there and he says, think of all the comrades we have lost. You know, he says to him that it is the rebellion of the living to fight and rage against the cruel world. Kind of like how Dylan Thomas said, rage against the dying of the light, you know? So he's kind of saying that, and he said this world, everything he said to them, it's meaningless, but it is in the direction of your conscious free will and it's effort that their meaning arises. There is no such thing as purpose without effort. Purpose is a sort of momentum that arises from effort. So anyways, Commander Irving says it's as if it's the last thing that the human free will can do when it's in a world of kind of cruel conditions of suffering. You rebel against suffering by living, by purely living. So in some sense, the effort of your lifetime is an eternal effort of a being. But even though the objective nature of your lifetime is temporary, that means my voice, it's like this live stream happens once in a lifetime. And eventually they rage. And they suddenly the soldiers see Commander Ervin's mindset is one where he has in some sense learned to push fear away and march. That is the nature of life. And trust me, when you see something you're afraid of, I want you to look at the sky and say, thank you, God, you have answered my prayer. Because behind that fear, your truth remains. You will become fearless when there's something to live for, trust me. You see this in the compassion of the archetype of the mother and the archetype of the father. They are both alive for their continuity, for the continuity of their creation. And so you will realize at some point that your mind is a creation and you are in some sense something that is generated. And so generated. And because it's something that's creative in some sense, that means you are, your consciousness, your whole being is like the parent of your creative vision. You see, and so people, the issue is everybody is creative, they just don't know how to acknowledge creativity. Because the educational system fails at teaching art. And some people say, how can you teach art? And I will tell you how, by giving people a mirror. The edge of creative vision is the eternal victory of temporary failure. A girl sat down, lied down on a grass field and looked at the clouds. She looked at the clouds and she said, how could the clouds be here? And suddenly she closed her eyes and her hair became an ocean and her thoughts, in some sense, journeyed in the waves of the unknown mind. Trust me, your consciousness is remarkable. Every person's eyes has a divinity to it because they carry a viewpoint to life that no one else has. Your creative value, to be honest, is found when you realize nobody sees through your eyes and nobody can. They can get close to the linguistic similarities, but in some sense, you cannot, this is the kind of playful thing about this world. We're all here together on one planet, yet each of us sees not the same planet. And so that even Buddha spoke about this, how the nature of objective phenomena is empty, and it's that the attention imbues the objective phenomena with a subjective existence. And so your attention is key, the key that opens all the doors of your reality. Rabindranath Tagore, this Indian polymath, and a polymath is a person who's, in some sense, found a way to have the same creative spirit, same creative kind of spirit in the same, in many fields, in many branches of the arts. You know, so you know. But anyways, so he says, "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy." Sorry, guys, I was interrupted. I gotta say it again. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was purpose. Sorry, life was service. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. Oh, I got the quote out. um, and that there's an important significance in that quote. It means that the person first, the child opens its eyes to this world, first seeking its pleasures. And then it will wake up from the reality of the inner child's desires. And when the person wakes up from the reality of the inner child's desires, suddenly service becomes kind of the purpose of life. You exist simply to serve it. Why else would you exist for it? You know? And so, in some sense, this person acted upon the service. In some sense, the child chose to stand courageously, fearlessly march through beyond the desires of childhood. And the person eventually, in their service, realized service was joy. So first you are seeking pleasure, then you forget it, then you seek service, and after you've been, in some sense, serving the world, you suddenly find that dimension of pleasure return. And so service, in some sense, becomes joy. And this service is not an ideological service. It's not like, oh man, go follow some like strict ideology so you're serving everything. Like it's not like that. It means nature's response to itself. Our free will is deciding the intelligence of this universal sector. And once the species stops playing with language like a child, it will serve the cosmos. And then a grander audience will find us. Anybody who listens to these Mr. Within talks, um, I assume you to already know the value of writing and to be a person who's writing. You have to constantly practice the art of being aware of the veil of thought. And the veil of thought is actually kind of the egoic point of the moment that divides the inner reality with the outer. Once you truly go within, something unique happens. You start living not as a creature of attribute. You don't care about the attributes of life don't become significant. In some sense, the attributeless watching of where all of it's going becomes significant. So what would eternity live for? Beyond the dance of existence and non-existence. How dare we define the higher dimensions when we can step into them? Language may be the skin of the ego, but the winds of evolution are the winds of evolution can only be witnessed by a collective dream, not by an individual dream. It's as if before it was enough if the person just their imagination could contribute to their personal dimensions. But now we are reaching a point in civilization where your mind is responsible for your species. So first, this is the situation. My realization is that before we take care of other species, we have to take care of our own species. And the way we take care of our own species by having a reality check, a universal reality check, a moment where there is freedom from any ideological context and the person is in some sense the presence of the moment, glancing at what has to happen next. In that scene in Attack on Titan where Erwin and all the troops are marching towards their death, but through a sort of noble, rebellious kind of rage, he says, "My soldiers, scream! My soldiers!" Suddenly, all the soldiers scream, and he says, "My soldiers, rage!" And all the soldiers rage, and they're all on horses at this moment. And then he says, "My soldiers, fight!" My voice kind of dropped at that, but he says he shouts it very loudly. And when he shouts, "My soldiers fight," you see the liberation of the fear that was limiting the personality of the person at their last moment. Believe it or not, that's the thing. The fearless uh, don't seek meaning, they seek where the meaning goes. And as Rumi says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a place. I will meet you there. And when the soul sits on that grass, the world is too full to talk about. We have to learn to become life sensitive because we are becoming too ideologically sensitive, and that ideological sensitivity will, in some sense, lead us towards a sort of technological box where we are being choked out of our natural way of living. So the species has to, in some sense, and he says the world is too full to talk about. We have to realize that beauty doesn't need to be caged. Much blessings and namaste.